Okay, hello everyone. I'm Renate Klein from Spinifex Press. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of this fantastic book by none other than Susan Hawthorne called Lesbian, Politics, Culture, Existence. We respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of the lands and the waterways. And the countries on which Spinifex offices are situated are Giru, Bunurong and Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Gundungurra and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So what I will do now is to introduce the launcher, Kaye Moseley. Then Kaye will talk about Susan's book for about 15, 16 minutes. Then I introduce Susan Hawthorne, and then Susan will talk about her book for the same time. And then it depends on whether there are many questions or if Kaye wants to say more to Sue back or whatever. Then we take it from there and just freewheel. And then at the end, I will say a few more thank yous. All right, so Kaye Moseley is an artist and for 30 years has taught art in government schools in Victoria. Kaye was active in gay liberation in the early 1970s, and in 1973 she attended the first national lesbian conference in Australia. Over the following years, she was involved in lesbian communities and activities. Following a family tragedy in the 1980s, Kaye spent more time caring for her family members. In the early 1990s, Kaye helped to design this beautiful Spinifex logo, and in 1994, she inaugurated the annual Satin and Silk Ball on behalf of Matrix Guild. I really remember those balls. They were fantastic. In 2008, Kaye moved to coastal Victoria and since then has been involved in land care activities and with her local lesbian community, as well as with her family. Most recently, she completed the illustrations for Jennifer Cameron's book on women, goddesses, and communities of peace. Welcome, Kaye, and thank you very much for doing us the honor of launching Sue's book.
Well, thank you, Renata. Hello, everybody. I'd like, first of all, to acknowledge that I live on the traditional homelands of the Yalak Bullock clan of the Bunurong people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So when Sue asked me to launch her new book, I felt honoured. I've known Sue for over 40 years. We met in 1981 and became friends. In our early days of getting to know each other and sharing common interests, most notably women's history and archaeology, I discovered that Sue had many other interests, including science, philosophy, languages, poetry, and women's writing. Sue is an intelligent and creative thinker, diligent in her application to her study and to her writing, which I've noticed over the years. I love that she studied ancient Greek so that she could read Sappho in the original and that she now studies Sanskrit. She's a poet and a philosopher, a critical researcher, and an articulate writer. So Sue's new book is titled Lesbian, Politics, Culture and Existence. So I think it's pertinent here to call upon Sappho. Our actual naming, as you probably all know, comes from Sappho of Lesbos, from around 2,500 years ago, a prolific poet best known for her love poems, many of which were addressed to women. So her work was hugely popular in antiquity, so much so that by the late 16th century BCE, the meaning of the term lesbian changed from one of Lesbos to a woman who prefers her own sex. So as a term, lesbian's been around for a very long time. Despite their amazing age, some of Sappho's poems have survived and come down to us, albeit in fragments. In fragment 147, she declares, "Someone, I say, will remember us in some future time." And we do. So Lesbian is a collection of 25 essays and 3 poems written between 1975 and 2024, encompassing almost 50 years of time. Sue's essays are extensive in the breadth of her research and the topics covered, a combination of personal and political. They outline the concerns that women and feminists have been dealing with for many years. So I'm glad that Sue included in her introduction a brief history of her political activism. It's a really interesting timeline for us. She tells us that in 1973, she joined Women's Liberation Group at La Trobe Uni, and in 1974 came out as a lesbian. In that year also, she began volunteering at the Melbourne Rape Crisis Centre, and at this time she joined a consciousness-raising group where she freely discussed her epilepsy for the first time in a supportive environment. The 1970s were an exciting time to be a lesbian, particularly a lesbian feminist, because a great lesbian culture was in bloom across Australia at that time, mostly inspired by the women's liberation movement and the radical feminist movements which were emerging in the USA. There have been flowerings of lesbian culture in Western history before, most notably in the 19th century in America and in the French salons of the earliest 20th century, where women who loved women called themselves saphists. In 1973, the first National Lesbian Conference in Australia was held in Sorrento. It was organised by a group of women who called themselves radical lesbians, and it brought together women from several states in Australia, both politically and amorously. It was actually a very wild sort of conference. Chris Sitka has detailed and written an engaging account of this first National Lesbian Conference in Australia and the political activism of the radical lesbians in the following years. So you can find her article on the internet under the title, A Radical Lesbian, Her Story. In the following years in Australia, there were many women's conferences and gatherings. Sue notes in one of her essays how lesbian feminists were the backbone of the women's liberation movement. The concept of sisterhood reigned supreme, and lesbian feminists were active in establishing women's centres, independent publishing houses, cafes, consciousness-raising groups, women's dances and balls, and lesbian rock bands, women's theatre groups, women's community radio programs, and also a monthly art salon. Lesbian magazines appeared in Sydney and Melbourne, and women's bookshops were established. One collective of lesbian feminists bought 1,000 acres of mountainous bushland in New South Wales for the purpose of establishing a women-only space. This was a reflection of separatism adopted by some lesbians at this time. Over the following decade, other groups formed, like the Jewish Lesbian Group, a Lesbian Mothers Group, and Matrix Guild, an organisation for older lesbians. And then in 1991, we had a second National Lesbian Conference that was held in Sydney, organised with a theme celebrating our differences and giving prominence to lesbian women of different ethnic origins. It was a very memorable concert at that time, held at the Sydney Opera House, which was filled with 2,000 wildly appreciative lesbians, and ululations filled the hall. It was quite an amazing night. So throughout these years, Sue taught philosophy, worked with unemployed youth, Aboriginal education, taught English as a second language to Arabic-speaking women. At Women 150, she was a coordinator of writing, music and theatre, and tells us how she was able to subvert the celebration of 150 years of colonial settlement and bring Eva Johnson's play Cinderella to Melbourne, an anti-fairy tale play about invasion, colonisation and the stolen generations. Sue also organised other big events at this time, including a talk in the Great Hall with Doris Lessing, the NGV, National Gallery in Victoria. And later, she was on the committee of Spoleto, which became the Melbourne Writers' Festival, where she wrote funding grants for women's writing, both nationally and internationally. So all this experience gave Sue a grounding in her future direction, and she became an editor at Penguin in 1986, and that began her career as a publisher. And then Sue met Renata. This was an explosive coming together of two fiery, dynamic women, a Sagittarian and an Arian, the beginning of a beautiful and lasting relationship and the birth of a new publishing house. So in 1991, Spinifex Press was launched and went on to publish a hugely diverse range of innovative and controversial lesbian and feminist books. Sue herself is the author and editor of over 30 books, which encompass fiction, poetry, and non-fiction. And with Renata, she's written and edited many anthologies. So in reading the essays in Lesbian, I was in awe at the extensive amount of research, Sue, that you covered and your incisive critiques. And what I found in my reading of the essays is how prescient many of them are or were, dealing with issues which are now foremost in the backlash against women and lesbian feminists today. So in her essays in 2003 and 2004, Sue was writing about the depoliticization of lesbian culture. We are becoming linguistically invisible, she writes. Queer has become so inclusive that it doesn't allow space for lesbians to exist. This seems to be the case with many younger lesbians whom I watched on a video show last year, who said that they preferred to be called gay or same-sex attracted, and the word lesbian has become too scary for them to own. In 2005, her essay, Not on Anyone's Program, Sue writes about the plight of lesbian refugees who cannot be open about themselves. She documents the violence against lesbians, including rape, torture, and murder in many countries, and the way this violence is ignored by mainstream media and distorted. In other essays, Sue gives us a critique of the institution of heterosexuality and lesbian feminism as a strategy, a campaign for lesbian human rights, lesbian economics, lesbian traditions, and cyberculture and poetics. So in 2001, Sue writes of transgender people in the circus, and in 2021 gives us a comprehensive account of the megatrans industry that is funded by billionaires, putting money into universities, hospitals, and pharmaceuticals to promote their goals. She suggests in her essay on separatism that trans people could stop colonising women's spaces and rights and set up their own independent organisations, meet their needs, and support others like themselves, as women have done, and that they read, listen to, and improve their knowledge of women, offer support to women in women-led campaigns, and refuse to take over women's ideas, history, and actions. So in 2017, I thought that was a really important thing. That would be great. In 2017, Sue discusses the new inventive writing of Australian lesbian writers. Her essay on the aerial lesbian body describes for us the fear, joy, and lightness she experienced as she learned to trust her body in aerial flights on the trapeze, and how she learned to trust other women to hold their weight. Sue discusses the falling body in this essay and facts around her epilepsy. Sue dedicated her book, for the unrecorded, unremembered, unnoticed lesbians, and for the lesbians who shouted and made waves. The thing about lesbianism is that it is an emergent identity. As lesbians, we are everywhere. We have no racial profile as such, no national profile as lesbians. We have different skin colours. We are born into different countries around the world, into different classes, different faiths, and our personal histories are all different. But our group history is one of continual emergence. We are women who love women. I think it's in our DNA, and we've always existed. There are traces of us everywhere. As Sue says in her 1997 essay, often we have had to hide what we are. Within patriarchy, we have no place. Women loving women is beyond patriarchy. She says, and I quote, "Lesbian knowledge is the wild storm at the edge of the patriarchal mindset." But thanks to feminist publishing, old lesbian cultures have become much more visible. And in 1997, Sue wonders what role the internet will play in the dissemination of this information. The last essay in Sue's book is titled "The Lesbian Art of Suzanne Bellamy, Creativity as a Political Strategy." It is a beautiful account of a unique artist, a writer and an activist. Many of us are fortunate to have one or more of Suzanne's very original sculptures in our homes. Her art is visionary and mythic, and Sue gives us an insightful account into the creative processes and inspirations behind Suzanne's work. This essay is a celebration of the art and passions of Suzanne, and also a loving account of the friendship between Sue and Suzanne. The lovely cover photograph of Suzanne's sculpture, Lesbians Reading Linear B, takes us into the mythic and into ancient script. Just want to hold it up for a sec. Yeah. And many of Suzanne's sculptures are of women sitting on couches, on eggs, in boats, reading books, reminding us that writing is the guide. It's the continuum that carries us through the millennia and across the planet. There are many lesbian feminist writers who are contributing to our ongoing culture. And so I think that we can say, like Sappho, that someone in some future time will remember us. Books are so important. And I'm very pleased to launch this Lesbian, into the universe. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you very much, Kaye. That was a wonderful introduction and launch of Susan's book. And yes, absolutely, somebody will remember us. I just hope sooner rather than later. But later is okay too. So now, without too much ado, I will introduce the artist and writer, Susan Hawthorne. Susan Hawthorne joined the women's liberation movement in 1973 and quickly volunteered at Melbourne's Rape Crisis Centre. She has organised women's writing festivals, local, national and international. She has been an aerialist in 2 women's circuses and taught in a range of courses in universities. She has worked in Aboriginal education and taught English to Arabic-speaking women. She is a poet, novelist, critic, and political commentator with a PhD in Women's Studies and Political Science from Melbourne University. She has also studied ancient languages and translated poetry from ancient Greek and Sanskrit, and is still learning Sanskrit. She is the author of 18 books and co-editor of 12 anthologies. Her work has been translated into Arabic, Czech, French, German, Hungarian, Polish, Portuguese, Spanish, and Tamil. Susan has won a number of awards. The most recent is the Magdalene Burns Award, shared with no other but me. So, welcome, Susan Hawthorne, to your launch.
Thank you very much, Renata Kleins. It's a great pleasure to be here. And thank you, Kaye, for that wonderful talk and for starting with Sappho. I really appreciate that. It's actually very hard to know where to start, where to pause and where to end when speaking about a book that covers 50 odd years of thinking. In mid-2023, when I was preparing a talk for Women's Declaration International, the Australia-New Zealand section, I discovered I'd written 60 articles with the word lesbian in the title. I was a bit shocked at this, and Renata thought it was about time for me to bring them together in a book. And so I began. 60 was too many. I knew I would have to cut out a significant number, and my aim was for no more than 25 chapters. So I began the book with a poem that I wrote in 1975 in response to Robin Morgan's lesbian poem from her book Monster. And that's followed by an autobiographical piece written in 2013 about events that happened in the early 1970s as I worked through an intense friendship with a woman, rape, and coming to feminist consciousness. These two pieces are the background to my first essay, written in 1976, about the institution of heterosexuality and lesbian feminism as a strategy for liberation. These are extracted from In Defense of Separatism, which was only published in 2019. It took a long time. 1976 was a critical year for me when I began to unpick the ways in which power worked against women. It underlies much of the rest of the book, as does my essay on cultural voyeurism, in which I write about various kinds of exoticizations in literature. In this and other essays, I synthesize my analyses across different forms of oppression that create racism, sexism, and ethnocentrism. There are two main strands in the book, and I wanted to be able to bring together politics and culture. So the first strand is essays on the politics of lesbian existence. And I tackle subjects like violence between lesbians, the fashionable SM and BDSM movements that were very popular in the 1980s. In a way, this is a substratum for what was to happen over the next couple of decades with the rise of postmodernism and queer culture. This resulted in the destruction of women's studies, the invasion of women's spaces by men, and my personal example was when a trans fellow wanted to join the women's circus, and the expansion of trans culture in academic and other settings. The second strand is essays about lesbian culture, and the two things weave in between one another. So you don't just get politics and then essays on culture. The two go side by side. Two early essays concern exoticization and how that is both a fake compliment and often appropriative. I discovered when going through the essay this time that most of the critics I refer to in the essay are lesbian writers who had noticed this appropriative move. Another essay I wrote quite early in the shift from analog to digital. At the time, I was playing with ways in which lesbian poetry might be developed in the cyber world. It's a bit odd to read this essay now, as it's both out of date in its language and yet prescient in some ways. And both these essays on exoticization and cyberculture I cite quite at length from the work of Suniti Namjoshi, who's here tonight. In 2003, I began writing about the depoliticization of lesbian culture, in which I look at the use of language and imagination and how relationships are steeped in political meaning. This was brought home to me really starkly in 2004 and 2005, when I attended first the World Social Forum in Mumbai, and secondly, a conference at Purdue University, Indiana, USA. In India, at Mumbai, I ran a workshop about the torture of lesbians, which was not only disrupted by its location at the far edge of the site, but by young heterosexual students of psychology who wanted to find ways to fix lesbians, make them normal by their terms. Then came the trans disruptors, who divided the entire group, resulting in a good proportion of the attendees leaving. This was really devastating. The conference in Purdue on trans positions was a similarly dreadful experience, even worse in many ways. Here were academics not only promulgating the trans ideology, but also promoting BDSM, pornography, and most shockingly of all, torture as play. In my attempt at speaking about lesbian knowledge and the burgeoning trans disciplines, I was ostracized by conference attendees, with the exception of a few who stuck with me. Afterwards, I was on a bus and I needed a 3-hour conversation with my friend Diane Bell, who was living in the US at the time, so it was easier to ring local number, about that experience and to process what had happened at the conference. That was followed by another long call to Renata here in Australia. I write more about this in the long chapter on the torture of lesbians. This was one of a series of articles I wrote between 2003 and 2006, and I later updated in my 2020 book, Vortex, The Crisis of Patriarchy. Apologists for BDSM become apologists for torture, claiming falsely that it's all about play and pleasure. The real-life documentation by lesbians who've been tortured, and indeed all torture victims, is that it is not play. The victim cannot say stop. She does not have a safe word. Indeed, she does not know if she will be alive at the end of the day. Many lesbians speak about corrective rape, an appalling act in which the rapist claims that this will convert her to heterosexuality, a claim that is beyond belief, but very common. Many of the lesbians violated, raped and tortured become refugees, and I have a chapter on that subject too. In a chapter that comes later in the book, I interrogate the subject of lesbian human rights. Do lesbians have them? Do lesbians deserve them? This chapter actually combines 3 separate talks I gave in Melbourne, Wellington and Ottawa between 2008 and 2011. There were a lot of crossovers in that, and so it was better to bring them together. The invisibility of lesbians continues in academic areas such as economics. When the Feminist Economics Conference came to Australia in 2006, thanks to Prue Hyman, who's also here, I decided it was time to try my hand at this. I had written a lot about globalization, ecology and economics in my book Wild Politics, and I wanted to see whether I could put a case for lesbians being included in economic theory, and I'll leave you to decide whether I have. In 1994, I joined 2 circuses, the Women's Circus and the Performing Older Women's Circus, known as POW. It was POW that inspired my article on the aerial lesbian body, in which I look at the body as female, lesbian, aging, disabled, speechless, as well as tortured and singing. It was in many ways a real joy to write this chapter, and it's followed by another which is called Matrices, which uses a quote from Canadian lesbian writer Nicole Brossard, which goes, "A lesbian who does not reinvent the world is a lesbian in the process of disappearing," and that's from her book, The Aerial Letter. I've been lucky enough to have a couple of overseas literature residencies, the first in Chennai, India in 2009, and the second in Rome between 2013 and 14. Both these residencies fed into my chapter called Or, Failing That, Invent, which is a quote from Monique Wittig's extraordinary novel, The Guerrière, which I first read in 1975. It has influenced my writing of fiction and poetry in immeasurable ways. I go back to it again and again. Here I plunge into the depths of language, including etymology, especially of the word cow, which is related to our words, the English words for queen and woman. I go on to unpack the so far undeciphered Linear A script from Crete, and I create imagined translations. That was lots of fun to do that. I'm not the first lesbian writer to refer to Linear A. Australian poet Dorothy Porter, in her collection Crete, wrote, "When I was 22, just about everything was Linear A." It's a wonderful quote, and it's the world that young lesbians puzzle over that needs deciphering. Towards the end of the book, I have several more essays on political matters, which in some ways are overviews of my thoughts on radical feminism and lesbian feminism. One on fragmented feminisms takes up the subject of postmodernism again and its destructive effect of feminist solidarity. Also, its reification of nihilism, annihilation, and immateriality. I revisit what I call the trans scam and the social and cultural effects of trans ideology on lesbians, including the way the amendments to the 1984 Australian Sex Discrimination Act in 2013 have thrown lesbians and indeed all women under the bus. This has been reflected recently in the federal court decision against Sal Grover in the case Tickle, a Man versus Giggle, as well as the Lesbian Action Group's unsuccessful application to be able to hold a lesbian-only event at Melbourne's Pride Centre. But over the last 2 days, Lesbian Action Group, or known as LAG, has been at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal and challenging that. And you can actually follow that on tweets, and I'll give that to you later. These are the results of the attacks on lesbians that have been going on since the late 1980s. I also revisit my 1976 essay, which became In Defence of Separatism in 2019, the book form. The 2021 talk was written for a lesbian conference in Germany and picks up on the sections in its belatedly published book form. I end the book, as Kaye says, with an homage to my dear friend, Suzanne Bellamy, who died in 2022. Some of you, indeed, I hope many of you, are familiar with her art. If not, look for many covers of Spinifex books that display her work. Among them is The Falling Woman, Remember the Tarantella, My Sister Chaos, and of course this book, Lesbian. But we also did this joint project called Unsettling the Land, which is artwork by Suzanne on the inside and a poem by me. Again, that was great fun to do that. That's a 2008 chapter. I'm eternally grateful for my friendship with Suzanne, which began in person in 1981. We also visited one another. We did joint projects in art and poetry, and some poems and Ariel's performances were inspired by her. Suzanne's work should be much better known. At present, it is mostly held in the homes of lesbians around Australia and some places overseas. And a quote that I include in the introduction to my book about her and her work is, she says this: I don't think anyone looked at women's liberation as an expression of an art movement. A wonderful quote. This is what I've tried to make clear in this book, the intersection between political activism and artistic expression across all art forms. The book finishes with another poem, Things a Lesbian Should Know. It begins that the lesbian is as old as humanity and maybe older. How to conjugate the word to love in any language. So that's the end of my talk. But I'm now going to go on and just say some thank yous, because usually Renata gets to do this, but we swapped roles tonight. So there are many, many women I need to thank. Please spread the work about this and other books by writers that Spinifex has published. And as I said in my dedication, for the unrecorded, unremembered, unnoticed lesbians, and for the lesbians who shouted and made waves. And there are lots of lesbians like that here this evening. To my friend Kaye Moseley, whom I've known and loved since 1981. We were part of a 3-women discussion group we called Cobweb that comprised Kaye, Robin Arianrod, and me. Doesn't seem enough, does it, 3? But boy, it was. We talked about art, prehistory, mathematics, physics, literature, and a whole host of other subjects. When we ran out of talk, we attended Taekwondo classes for a year and threw one another around on the mats. I learned a great deal from both of them. And Kaye has contributed to the look of Spinifex with her beautiful logo that's visible on every book we've ever published, apart from the very first edition of Angels of Power, which we published before we had a logo. And Kaye has also contributed under a pseudonym, because she was teaching in schools, to several books. Thank you, Kaye, for your friendship, art and inspiration, and of course, for your launch this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
In the bibliography of the book, you'll see the names of all the thinkers whose work has been important to me. And there are others outside of those essays that didn't quite make it into the book. Thank you also to the endorsers of my book, whose words you can read at the beginning. They are philosopher Janice Raymond from the US, Mona Lisa Gomide, lesbian publisher and translator from Brazil, Lynn Hahn, Sheila Jeffries and Sally Wainwright, all lesbian activists and writers from the UK, but I'm sure Sally would like to be said that she's really from Scotland. And Prue Hyman from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm so glad they liked the book. To all at Spinifex, thank you from the bottom of my heart. To Pauline Hopkins, eagle-eyed editor and fine thinker, the book would not be in as good shape without you. Danielle Osborne, office manager, you can thank her when you receive any Spinifex books through the post. Danielle also looks after many tasks that are unseen outside of Spinifex. So, you know, there are things that happen behind the scenes. A lot of that is Danielle. Also, Rachel McDermott, who's the co-host this evening and marketing manager, whose work on this book continues well after publication. She's also our WebWhiz co-host on this Zoom and video editor. Caitlin Roper, social media manager. If you're on any of those platforms, you've seen her work. Thank you, all of you, for your patience while I ran late and forgot things while working on this book. Books also need to be designed, typeset, and be given covers that draw you in. Thank you to Helen Christie, internal designer of the text and typesetter, and some of those poems were a bit challenging. And she has made the book look beautiful. And to Deb Snibson, whose cover designs are commented on by many readers around the world. One last thank you is to Renata Klein, co-publisher, co-founder, co-conspirator, in continuing to publish radical, controversial and innovative books with an optimistic edge. Without Renata, none of this would exist. I thank her for her numerous conversations in which we sometimes disagree. What a terrible thing. For her generosity and mostly patience, for her ability to be really silly, including singing with our dog Nala, who I'll introduce you to at some point. To Renata for suggesting in publisher fashion that this is a book I should do. Along with Pauline, she has edited, commented, proofread it again and yet again. And this is the kind of commitment every writer dreams of. So thank you with love from me.
Oh, and now I cry. Thank you very much, Susan and Kaye, again for your beautiful introduction to this book. And I have to say, despite the fact I've read it about 5 times now, I still think it's really fantastic. And if you find a mistake, please contact us. There shouldn't be any, but of course there will be some. Now, are there any questions? I think I didn't see anything in the chat. Any hands up? Or anybody who just really wants to say something? So like, you know, Morgan is here and Robin is here and Prue is here and Doris is here and Donna even is here from Canada. So any wise words, any shout out to lesbians internationally? Or else, Kaye, do you want to say something back to Sue about what she said?
That was lovely, Sue. I really liked that, listening to it, and it's brought back a few memories. I just hope the book goes, you know, gangbusters for you. It's a great book.
Thank you. Yes, I do too. Would be a great thing. You know, sometimes you have to shout to be heard, and this is my way of going, lesbian. And you know, who knows? They might just completely sideline us, which is also quite possible. Look, there are so many people here so many women here who I think would be able to say things. So, you know, here's Angela Wild, Kaye Payton.
Jill has her
and
hand up.
Mes- who has? Oh, I can't see the hands.
Jill.
Sorry. Okay, Jill.
K-I-double-L.
Jill, can you say something then? You need to turn off your microphone.
Turn on.
Maybe that was an accident. I can't see the hand up anywhere.
My
Did you
visual
want to-
problem.
Did you want to say something, Jill?
No, there was nothing I wanted to say other than thank you. It's great. You know, I didn't have my hand up, but I don't know what.
Oh, it's a ghost hand.
I thought there must be another Jill somewhere.
That's all right.
It was my vision. Sorry.
That's all right. And do you want to say something?
Oh, well, I really love this presentation. I'm looking forward to buying your book and reading it. And I think it's a really valuable contribution to lesbian culture and lesbian politics, because it's reclaiming our history and our culture over a long period of time. And a lot of it's becoming lost or we're being silenced. So it's just absolutely wonderful that you and Renata have the power to publish something like this when most people would not publish it anymore. So fabulous. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Vivian.
Robin Bishop was.
Yeah, I just want to say it sounds amazing and I can't wait to read it. And it's wonderful to learn about all the amazing things you've done, Susan. And I just want to get my hands on it and read it.
Oh, thank you, Robin. Thank you very much. For some reason, I can't see that those of you are putting your hands up. So just yell out if you want to say something.
Unmute yourself first.
Yeah, unmute yourself and then yell.
And there's also the launching at readings as well.
Yeah,
coming up as well.
Yeah, it's coming, Rachel, it's coming. I have a script. I have a script. So, for those of you who will be in Melbourne, there will be a bookshop launch in no other than Readings in Carlton, and it will be on the 17th of September. And Colleen Clare, that many of you, of course, know, who's just sent a text. That's really funny, isn't it? What a coincidence. She will be the launcher in Melbourne. So that was definitely an event to come to. I mean, if Susan and I are even able to speak, because it's so cold there, but we'll try, we'll find our woolies. And then something else, you know, sometimes small miracle happens, but you probably know, those of you in Australia know the magazine Arena, sort of a leftish publication that's still going on. And lo and behold, they are actually publishing an article by Susan on none other than Lesbian. And it's a pretty good article and pretty tough. It says a few things that probably will get Arena a few bad raps around the knuckles, but that's really good. So we'll just see where it takes us, this lesbian journey, and who picks it up and who doesn't. Robin Morgan is going to do an interview with Susan, so that's another lesbian who's wanting to speak about International Lesbian Sisterhood, so that's really good. Sorry, Susan, did I interrupt you?
Barbary has her hand up as well. Barbary, you come in.
Readings, eh? That's quite a coup after Mark Rubio was forced to do his grovelling apology to the transgender person who said 2 years after the launch of Julie Bindle's book that he was going to not speak unless he got an apology. So congratulations on that, and I hope that Readings stores actually stock your book, which would be quite a coup.
They will. They will.
Well, they've ordered it. They have ordered it for the launch, so hopefully they will all sell, of course, and they don't have to send them back, you know, if they have extra. So yeah.
I've just got it the other day, so it's definitely at Readings, not a problem.
Oh, very good.
It's already there. Oh, that's good. Yeah. Hi, Jean. Yeah.
Hi.
Angela, have your hand up.
Yeah, congratulations, Susan, and really well done. I'm really looking forward to read it. It looks really amazing. I want to say I really appreciate the weaving you do between politics and art, which I very often am feeling very frustrated as a creative woman myself, that it's very, very much on politics and the creative side, cultural side is overlooked or completely dismissed or ignored. And so that means a lot. I'm really looking forward to that. And also that it had seemed to me for the last few years that there was a little bit of a kind of nothing much on lesbian going on, and it feels like in the next for you know your book, and there's a few other projects coming, so I'm feeling very exhilarated and happy. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your work too on getting the L out. That was such an important concept for me. Yeah, it really was terrific. That's about getting the L out of the GBT XYZ thing. And of course, most of it doesn't apply to us. Okay, yes, Cheryl.
Hi. Adding on to that, I wonder if you could add DIY on the end of LGBT, etc.
Apart from doing it yourself. What do you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Susan, that's been a terrific launch and so interesting. And I just think you're heroic women. I really do. I love you to bits. And I do want to ask, is there anything happening for women in that are suffering under the Taliban at the moment? Because that's been on the news recently and I think very concerning.
It is hugely concerning, and it's really hard to know anything because how do you get any information out?
Yeah.
When you have to sit inside a burqa whenever you step outside the door, and otherwise you're indoors and invisible. I don't know. I really don't know. I think it's an incredibly important question. I am doing a question thing with Australian Book Review. One of the questions they asked is, what's your worst nightmare? And I said, being inside a burqa all day, every day, because actually I think that's a terrible way to have to live. So yes, I truly don't know what to do. And it's the same, it's the comparable situation that, lesbians who are refugees, lesbians who have been tortured and who are trying to escape from countries, or even, lesbians who just cannot live in the country where they're living. And that's a terrible situation and difficult to know what to do.
Bronwyn Winter, who writes a Substack these days, she has written a very good blog on precisely that problem, the plight of women in Afghanistan. So I guess you'll find it if you just type in Bronwyn Winter, and it's a Substack, and it's still free at the moment, so you can read it. And we're talking at the moment with an Afghan woman who's a refugee here, and we'll see if something happens. So it's just so horrible. And I'm so angry, and will be angry forever, at the Americans that they just did that. They just left them there 3 years ago. It is almost to the day, a little bit more. And they just left them and left all these, all these women there. And so many were killed. So many couldn't go to school anymore, lost absolutely everything. And they call themselves, a democracy and standing up for freedom. I wish Kamala Harris would think a bit more about these kinds of things then. But yes. So thanks for that question, Cheryl. Very important.
I'm just putting in the chat the tweet that you can follow if you want to see what's happened in the last few days in Melbourne over Lesbian Action Group appeal. So it's at Tribunal tweets number 2. So yeah, so there's things happening all day, every day. Some of it dreadful, most of it dreadful, some of it very good. And there's a meeting in Zimbabwe at the moment called Meet in the Middle. And I've just received a message saying we're with you in spirit. So that's nice. Thank you, Annie.
Yeah, it's really shocking. It's 2024, and we have just been lectured by a judge that says, sex can change. Sex is changeable. I mean, biology 101, every school child should learn about XX and XY, and no, you can't change it. I mean, why didn't they do a DNA test with Mr. Tickle? They would have found out that there's a lovely little Y chromosome there. So, he should have been immediately taken out of the group women. I really don't know why they can't do that. It's probably prohibited. Any more insightful comments or?
Barbara,
Barbara?
Barbara has her hand up again. Sorry, Barbara.
I just want to be a little bit naughty and say
How unusual.
and say to Angela that your Get the L Out work was quoted in the Lesbian Action Group case in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal.
Oh, thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, I don't do social media, so this is my only chance to talk to you.
Thank you very much. It's good to know that that the work we do or we collectively do can be useful even years after.
Of course, the woman who was a witness for the Human Rights Commission, who had not a single source referenced in her presentation, criticised you for your methodology, which she said was extremely unreliable.
There is thank you for that, Barbara. There is also a question from Ursula Cotter, who asks if any of us know Jean Steele. Yes, we do know Jean Steele. Jean Steele started Shrew Bookshop with Gilly Goff back in the 1980s in Melbourne. The bookshop closed in, I think, was 1994. I haven't seen Jean very often, but she I saw her a few years ago, but I don't really know what she's doing now. But she certainly is here. And Liz has appeared. Hi, Liz. You want to ask a question? Make a comment?
Hi, Susan. Look, huge congratulations to you. I know this has been coming for quite a while. I've heard through the lesbian grapevine. So just congratulations to you and to Spinifex. My question is, I'd really like to get your book out to younger lesbians in their 20s. Do you have any suggestions how we could do this? Is it available as an ebook? I mean, I'm certainly going to buy multiple copies and just give them out as gifts and talk to younger lesbians who are suffering such isolation. And do you suggest that the book is just read as it is, or just dip in wherever you want? I guess.
Well, it is available as an ebook, and it's cheaper when you buy it as an ebook.
Okay.
I mean, I do read ebooks, but I prefer actual printed books to read. But that's probably because I'm old these days. And I can't tell anybody how to read. You can just dip in and out. But I actually like the fact that it weaves in between, the creative side of things and the political side, and that I kind of draw those things together. So for me, that I think is a way of showing that it's not just a one-sided thing, or it's not just one-dimensional, that there are many dimensions to lesbian existence and lesbian community, lesbian culture and politics. And, we're not just, I have at one point a comment that, if you're a lesbian and you do something good, you make an achievement, all you get recognized for is your achievement. But if you're really, really bad, then you're only ever known as that bad lesbian. So yeah, that's also how it works. Apart from that, who knows? And as for getting, younger women, we are publishing some younger women. Hopefully that will also, draw more in. But it's marketing in this era is very difficult.
Thank you.
Vivian, you come back.
Thank you. Another marketing trick is if we, and I'll do this, is to go to our local library and order it in.
Yeah. Yep.
That's all
Because
I-
it's got a nice big spine.
and
it
it's got
does
lesbian, and any woman who's a lesbian who's they'll find it, you know, and they'll read it.
yes. And you can actually see, you know, the cover on the side, and actually you don't even have to know English, because on the back I've written, you know, lesbian all in different languages. I can't even tell you what they all are. Some are German, there's Spanish, there's French, there's Hebrew, there's Tamil, there's Greek, and so forth. So yeah, you know, hopefully that
You might, yes, you might get a shocking reaction from people.
it's possible. That's all right. I don't mind.
No, so long as they don't ban your book.
Well, you know,
Lavender's got her hand up.
Oh, hi, Lavender. I can't see your hand. Okay, Lavender, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, for all you've done. And I've always appreciated your essays and topics and papers. And as a matter of fact, Judith and I have got a couple that go back, you know, do lesbians have human rights, sitting on our coffee table in the front room. So every time visitors come by, and they tend to come by to see Judith because she's not going out so much, they can't but help notice them. So I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on the hard copy of your book, so that can be sitting there too, because, well, that's a marketing strategy to get into the heads of people. And I actually look forward to it because where I live up in the far north coast of New South Wales, there's some very worthy kind of sisters. One or two kind of might be able to sometimes say they're feminists, you know, those ones, very nice women. And so from time to time I do mention radical feminist and lesbian topics to them, and they kind of just nod and then keep on talking about the environment or the local council, which of course are important things as well. So this time I plan to, through our local bookshop, buy a number of copies, because I usually buy through the local bookshop because that enlightens the locals. And I also ask them, would you put it in the window, please? Because this is a recently published Australian book. So I'll be donating some to our local libraries so that the word's getting out there. So once again, thank you very much. And to Renata and the whole of Spinifex. It's been a really important thing for me to have this connection, because, you know, I don't live in the inner city. I'm not a latte lesbian. So many thanks again.
Thanks, Lavender. That's very nice. And I think it's actually coming up to the hour, so we should probably finish the Zoom.
Prue's got her hand up,
Prue,
and
okay.
Margie had a hand up.
Oh, okay. I don't know why I can't see people's hands. It's very weird. Prue and Margie, and then we'll have to stop. Okay, Prue.
Am I unmuted? Yep. Hi from hi from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I trust it's going to be in our shops, and we of course have one of the very few, if maybe only, lesbian library in Wellington, and I'll certainly get it publicity there. It's really, really good to see it out, and I think, you know, it's all the more ironic at the time when we are being invisibilized yet again. We've all getting old now, but we have to work really hard to tickle and giggle, and we've got a case too in New Zealand on taking to the Human Rights Commission, where lesbians have been removed from Pride, which we started. And,
I mentioned the lava case also.
Right.
If
so,
not in the book, then in the article at the arena, but maybe both.
Right. Well, we all have to keep working hard in our 80s to
yep.
keep going. And thanks very much for all you've done.
Thank you, Prue, and to you too. I wouldn't have written my piece on lesbian economics without you. So, you know. Margie.
On mute.
Margie, are you on mute? I can't see you.
She is.
No. Then you need to unmute, Margie. Because I don't think I can do it for you.
Not happening. Kaye, this is Kaye. I'm having trouble with mine, but I've got the book.
Okay,
and,
I've unmuted.
Oh, here she is. Great. Go,
Yes.
Margie.
Hello. Can I speak now or is someone else on?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I've watched your trajectory since 1970, Suzanne, along with beginning with Thelma Solomon at La Trobe Uni. And what a wonderful introduction today by Kaye, and what an incredible journey you've taken us all on over these many, many years. And those who are not with us today, I know would have spoken, you know, that's presumptuous, but Thelma would have loved it.
Vera would have.
And Vera would have loved it, and Suzanne. So my goodness, my goddess, keep on going with your other goddesses. And thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to make a comment.
Thanks, Margie. Okay, Kaye, over to you, Kaye Payton.
Thank you. I've had trouble fiddling around trying to do stuff here, but I'm glad I've got a book, and thank you for all your, it was a great idea, Renata, about, you know, like as the publisher's saying, and I'm looking forward to reading it all. It's been a great Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great. Actually, the whole thing went off for me at one point, but when I came back on, Kaye was still talking, and so I figured it was only me that went off.
Yeah, we were all here. So also where you can buy the book. I mean, in Australia, it's easy. You can come to Spinifex, but of course you can order it at any bookshops or libraries are really excellent because that gets them around. And when it's on the YouTube, Rachel usually puts on where you can buy it overseas. Like we have distribution in England and in Canada and in the US and Mexico. So you can get the book wherever you are. And of course, the one with the big A that we don't really want to mention has the book too in all its stores in the various countries. So I think unless there is some other very, very urgent things happening, we do need one other thing to do, which is extraordinarily important. No cooperating. Nala wants to say hello to everybody. Nala is the current incarnation of our dogs. Is obviously not terribly willing. Oh, here she is. She is a very, very, very good girl. She thinks this bloody Zoom launches is very boring. Nala, you. She's just gorgeous. So, you know, when we don't write just books, we play with dogs.